Thank you for watching this video. We would like to start off with a quick thank you to our annual sponsors. Our gold level sponsors, Geronimo Properties, Northmark, AEI Consultants, and EBI Consulting. Our silver level sponsors, St. James Real Estate Advisors and May Property Management. We would also like to mention our charitable partner for 2022, New View Communities, a CDC organization promoting affordable housing in central Massachusetts. To find out how you can become a sponsor of the New England CCIM chapter or to learn more about New View Communities, please feel free to visit our websites. There will be links in the description below. Greetings on behalf of the New England CCIM chapter. I'm Michael Chase, chapter president for 2022. Today is the 10th video for our 2022 CRE Expert Series. We are very pleased to be joined by Melina Ambrosino, president of Cherry Tree Group. Melina, I've known you for several years, and I'm very pleased you accepted our invitation to have an opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And before we dive into today's topic, let's start off with a quick introduction. Would you mind sharing a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Melina Ambrosino. I am the president of the Cherry Tree Group. We are a small boutique tax credit consulting company. We specialize in brownfields, renewable energy, the federal and state historic credit, and LIHTC credit. Two sides of our business: we broker and identify these credits for developers and bring in the equity into their projects to help, bring in some cash. And then we also look for high net worth individuals with passive income that could utilize these tax credits to help offset what they owe to Uncle Sam and to give them some depreciation, some tax credits and cash returns. So we've been around going on our 11th year. We have done over $100 million in tax credits throughout the country in under 10 years. And we're looking to expand our portfolio and try to double that as soon as we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that background. And I know you and your firm assist with several different types of tax credits. But for today's conversations, let's talk about brownfields tax credits. Can you give us a quick overview of that program?
Yeah. So the Massachusetts Brownfields Tax Credit was enacted in 1998. It was a program that was put in place to help the white knight. So essentially, as a developer, when you come in and you buy a contaminated land, you did not cause a contamination, then you are eligible for this brownfields tax credit. And 2006 is a super important year in this program because that's when this program became transferable, and that allowed for nonprofits, and it created a marketplace for the credit. So instead of the developer having to use a tax credit, they were actually able to sell the tax credit, which was huge because it was bringing in some cash equity into these projects. And the beauty of this program is that you were getting, that equity into the project before you started vertical construction. And, a lot of times developers are faced with these incidents where they did not realize the amount of contamination, and it comes as a surprise, and the cost of remediation is very expensive. So when we made it transferable, it created this marketplace. And kind of fast forward now, and throughout the years, there's been a lot of changes, but we've actually recently promulgated some new regulations last year in 2021 that kind of gave us a blueprint on this program a little bit more so than when they first came out in 1998. The program was designed to help developers clean up contaminated land they did not cause themselves. So there's a couple of criteria that we hit with that. You can't have caused the contamination. You must be in an economically distressed area. About 2/3 of Massachusetts is actually economically distressed. So we don't really kind of always have that problem. Giving an example, all of Boston's economically distressed. So, the seaport and all those areas are eligible for the credit. You need to be the owner or lessee. So you can't be the operator. You need to have either a lease agreement on the property or you need to be the deed owner. And then the remediation must be equal to or greater than 15% of the assessed value. So the assessed value at the time contamination was discovered, we take that assessed value and we coordinate costs. The program is probably one of the most lucrative programs in the country. Massachusetts, we're very, lucky to be in this state that has such a great program with no cap and includes a lot of expenses. And on the market, these credits sell between 90 and 93 cents on the dollar. So, on average, a developer can net approximately 80 to 85 cents back on the dollar of the credit they achieved in cash. And I mean, that's so important, especially now with how expensive things are getting with contaminated soil.
So that was a great overview, and it's the reason why we consider you a subject matter expert, Melina. So what are some of the eligible costs that can be included in an application for brownfields tax credits?
Yeah, so demolition to access contaminated soils, the trucking and hauling of the contaminated soils to the different facilities. And sometimes that can be, you know, $15 a ton up to, we've seen hundreds of dollars per ton, depending on the type of contaminants. All of your licensed site professional costs, the engineering costs, the actual excavation. So the site work costs we see can be eligible. There sometimes can be capping of utilities, removing utilities. It's, you know, the program's definitely more art than science. So each deal we look on a case by case basis, but those are your general overview of costs. And then you can also get a percentage of your general conditions based on your contractor and how the billing is set.
And then when you have your cleanup costs, how much of that can then you convert into tax credits?
Yeah, so if you get a deed restricted property, which is an active and use limitation, you get 25% of eligible expenses. If you get a permit solution with no conditions, so there's no deed restriction on there, you can actually get 50% of eligible expenses.
And then you said that can be used by the owner, developer, or tenant themselves, or it can be or those credits can then be sold. So who can use those? Do they have to be people with state tax liabilities?
Yes, yep. So in Massachusetts, an individual can use it to offset up to 50% of what they owe. So for example, if you owe $100,000, you can only use $50,000 of a brownfields credit. However, institutions and insurance companies can actually use it to offset 100% of what they owe. So we find that this credit is more marketable for institutions and financial institutions and insurance companies. However, and I will always recommend this, if you're a developer and you are able to use your own credit, I would always recommend that you use it because it's dollar for dollar for you. In the long run, it will help. But in that time of construction, you know, time value and money is very important. So selling it is always an option. But we'll work with you and your accountant, your CPAs, and maybe we can do a hybrid where you keep some and sell some. So we try to be as flexible as possible for our developers.
And you mentioned for some people, you might only be able to use up to 50% of your offsetting 50% of your income in a given year. Do these tax credits expire? Can you continue to carry them forward?
They do expire. It's a 5-year program. So the clock starts as soon as your permit solution is achieved. So by way of example, if it's achieved, let's just say in 2020, it would expire in 2025. So if we're currently in 2022, you only have 3 years left of that credit. Now, the owner can go back a year to amend their tax return and carry it forward for 5 years. Which is why, again, you know, an institution, when they can use 100% of that, they usually use it in year 1 versus the carry forward. So we find that this credit is more marketable as a 1-year credit by an institution.
Can you sell a portion of them, or do they all have to be used by the same group?
We can sell a portion. So we have divided up credits over the years. You know, just giving you an example, an insurance company has approached us and they've given us, you know, a list of individuals that can use it, and we've divided up just to help offset their liability. So we can divide it up numerous times. Typically, it's just cleaner to do one transaction, but we've also done scenarios where family members have all been a part of this and they all wanted a portion. So we allocated the appropriate portion. So we're very versatile in how that's the brokerage or the usage of the credit can be.
And you mentioned the people who are qualified for initially getting the credits are either the owner, developer, or tenant who are in place at the property during the time of remediation.
Exactly.
Is there any restriction with selling the property during that 5-year window if you haven't, in other words, you've cleaned up the property, it's 2020, you've gotten your tax credits, you're now able to use them to offset your income over the next 5 years. Do you have any restrictions with selling your property or no longer being a tenant at the property during that next 5 years?
So your only restriction is that you do have to be the owner or lessee the entire time during the cleanup happens. So if you achieve your cleanup, let's say today, August 2nd, and you file, and then, a year from now, you want to sell the property because you've already built your building and everything's done, there is no restriction on that. So it follows the taxpayer for that project, not the property, which is nice. Again, it's another benefit that Massachusetts has.
Is there a minimum or maximum size to the either cleanup costs or value of the tax credits?
So as long as it hits the 15% criteria for the assessed value, then there really is no minimum and maximum. We just want to hit that 15%. In fact, we do want to exceed it. So for our company and our organization, there is no credit too big or too small. So we've done one of the largest in Massachusetts, which is about $17.5 million. And most recently did a small one that only yielded about $8,000. So we look at them all.
So before you get into your cleanup, if you discover you have an environmental situation, before you start your cleanup, should you file for an abatement to reduce your assessed value?
So, that's very interesting. And we're actually in this scenario right now with the developer. And it definitely is something to consider, especially if you have a super high assessed value. However, on the other side of this is that depending on the fiscal year of how the state or how that municipality files for, their assessed value, it might not be eligible. So typically, what we try to do is contaminated land is always obviously assessed far less than a clean land with a building on it. So that is something to take into consideration. However, we have had scenarios like you're saying where the assessed value is quite high and the costs don't meet. The thing is that we take the assessed value of the year it was discovered. So that's why I say that fiscal year is important. If you discovered in the beginning of the year versus the end of the year, it could impact how it's done out. And then also to timing of some of the municipalities and towns and cities that we have, they may not get to it, but it's always, an option to consider and exercise.
Interesting. So you mentioned one of the qualified costs or LSP costs, and tell us why it's so important to work with the right LSP and how they could potentially impact your tax credits.
I cannot stress this enough about working with your LSP and the right LSP and communicating with your LSP. Your licensed site professional is the engineer that you hire to review these applications, to make this feasible for you, to come up with the best solution to remove the dirty dirt. Their applications and their RAM reports and their permit solution statement is filed under the DEP website, which we all have access to, which is what I do to review my analysis and my costs and what the state reviews. So communicating with them on that, letting them know you're filing for the tax credit. Also too, their field notes. When you're filing these credits, if you go online, it looks like a one-page form. Unfortunately, it's not a one-page form. There's a lot of stacks of documents that go with it. So all the invoice and the proofs of payments, but some of the key documents that are now required by the state are your LSP field notes. So their weekly activities and what they did, and all LSPs will have this. And then obviously their RAM reports and pre-characterization reports. Your LSP is the guidance on how we're going to manage this cleanup. So working with them, having the right one, having someone that you can work collectively with, having someone work with your your excavator and your vendors and your subcontractors is so important. So that communication is key. It's one of the things I stress enough is consistency is key, and working with your LSP is so important.
And also, I think you may have mentioned making sure they don't close out the site too soon so that you have the opportunity to capture all of the eligible costs.
Yes. So I think that one of the most important things is coming up with a plan. The sooner that you can get a tax credit consultant, your general contractor that's performing the work in your LSP on board, it's very important to come up with a plan. We've had LSPs close out sites prior to all the dirty dirt being off, for whatever eligible reason that there was. And, there's costs left on the table, or, work was conducted prior that would have been eligible because of the structure, they weren't eligible. Unfortunately, we've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars that are not eligible that would fit within the statute because of the way the statute's written. So involving everyone sooner than later and working through that can really, be the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars back in your pocket.
Mm. When you gave us a great overview of the program, you mentioned some of the requirements, and we talked about needing to be at least 15% of the sites of assessed value. You talked about being in economically distressed areas, which case a lot of Massachusetts is. You mentioned another one about entities. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So a nonprofit is eligible. So a trust is eligible. It needs to be for business purposes. So essentially what it is trying to eliminate is the single family house that is changing out an oil tank in their basement and replacing it. It has to be income producing. So condo apartments, like if your job is, that as a developer, we have done a community of single family homes. And in this case, the developer's job was to build single family homes and he was selling it. That was his business. So all those were eligible when we were cleaning up that contamination. And we're successful in getting the brownfields credit. So it's eliminate the single family homes, and it's also to eliminate cities and municipalities. They are not eligible in Massachusetts for the tax credit.
Talking a little bit more about brownfields tax credits, is there a limit that the state issues in a given year? And how long does the process take to apply and be potentially awarded your tax credits?
So there is no cap in the state of Massachusetts, which is amazing. Other states do have a cap on their programs. The brownfields program, the reason why there is no cap is, studies have shown that for every dollar the state of Massachusetts gives out, the state actually generates $7 to $9 back in taxes for the improved property of the land for cleaning up and having clean property. The process in and of itself can be a little bit difficult and time consuming. We've seen credits come out in less than a week. Most recently, we got a $237,000 tax credit that came out in less than a week and a half. The new regulations now say if you have a credit that is 500,000 under an eligible expenses, so a $250,000 credit, that it's subject to an expedited process, meaning that you could get it out in 30 days. So Cherry Tree works very hard to make sure that we, dot our I's and cross our T's and provide every documentation in a very detailed to fit in with that expedited program. However, due to unforeseen circumstances with these programs and these tax credits, in some cases, it can take up to 2.5 years if it's a larger credit or if it's a complicated credit. So there is timing on that. So what Cherry Tree tries to do is we try to work with you throughout the program and throughout the process to gather documents. So as soon as the sites close out, we quickly file with everything that we have. We like to be a part of the whole project. Department of Revenue's great in reviewing these documents and understanding their team's great, but there is a lot that goes into these projects. So sometimes it takes a lot to kind of sort through all these documents. These applications can be thousands of pages long, depending on how many trucking and haul log slips are included.
I see. And if it takes 2.5 years to get approved, that's already eating away at your 5-year window to use your tax credit. So by the time it gets approved, you have 2.5 years then to use them.
Exactly, which is kind of another reason why it's best to go to the institutions for this credit, because you've lost 2.5 years while it's been in audit.
Okay, great. Thank you for that background. And so we talked again, you mentioned that you help both developers, owners achieve those tax credits, but you also mentioned very early on that you can help potentially investors. What are the benefits of an investor looking for an alternative way to reduce their liabilities? Why should they be reaching out to you?
So this is such a great question because we know we get this question a lot, is that it's very obvious the developer wants cash for their project to help cover some of the overhead expenses in their pro forma. And one of the biggest question is, well, why would I want to buy someone's tax credit? Well, this is, as by way of an example, in a state transaction, it's not saving as much. So a brownfield is a state credit, it's transferable. We're selling a certificate to another individual and putting it into their entity. On these large scale projects, saving anywhere from, maybe 5 to 10% on your state liability, it's still money being saved. It's money that you otherwise would have paid to the state government. So a lot of investors come because they want to offset what they owe. And the state credit is a pure transferable reaction. It's very, very low risk for that transaction. And it's a fairly easy transaction to add on to your tax return when you're going to pay your taxes.
Okay. I know we've talked a lot about brownfields tax credits, particularly here in Massachusetts. Do you have any thoughts or any kind of high level bullet points for brownfields tax credit programs and maybe some of the other New England states?
Connecticut has had it programs, taken it back. Same with Rhode Island, but all these states, like Connecticut and Rhode Island, have other programs where you can kind of get some of these brownfields costs in to make them eligible. So there are a lot of tax credit programs, but not many similar Massachusetts brownfields tax credit programs.
Okay. And you mentioned some of the recent changes, such as expedited processing for certain sites. Are there any changes that you're on the lookout for that might be coming down the line?
Yes. So a lot of, with some of the changes in eligible expenses, we did decrease what typically was eligible. So one of the things I've said, credits that I filed, in 2016, 2017, 2018, it's not the same program that I'm filing now. I think it's very important for us. And one of the takeaways as an industry that I feel is that we have not had regulations since 1998. So we've been working off of a directive that took place in 2014 and technical release updates. There hasn't actually been anything set in stone. I love that we have regulations. It's something I can cite and something that I can show and use with developers and with the DOR and understanding. But I do hope that we eventually get to a place where some of the costs that were originally in when we were filing back then do become eligible now. I think that there are some levels of contaminated soil that have been eliminated, and you still have to remove them by Mass DEP. So the developer is still eligible to remove these credits. They may not just be tax credit eligible. So I do hope that we come to a happy medium with the classifications of soils. For the most part, though, I do love the expedited program to get things out in 30 days. I know my clients have loved that. I have loved that for them. I also think that the uses of the credit has been great. And I think that now that we're kind of ramping up and getting things out quicker, the transfer process is really nice. So there are a lot of benefits to the new regulations, but I do think some of the decrease in costs has been kind of unfortunate. I know some of our developers aren't thrilled with that, but we're actively working towards coming up with that happy medium.
Great. Well, we're wrapping up our conversation here. Is there anything that the New England CCIM chapter can do to help support professionals and firms like you?
Education. I think that your organization is great. You work with a lot of developers, a lot of different types of people in the real estate industry. Commercial real estate industry is very small, and Michael, you and I can speak on experience that you had a developer that didn't realize this program existed. And by working with you, he identified this program and was able to capture a good amount of costs back. I think a lot of people don't realize these programs are there to help them. So I would definitely recommend advising your clients to research what available programs are there to call, because there are so many incentives to help developers and to help cover some of the cost. So I would say education, getting the word out that there's these programs here, and also to know that you can actually get cash back into your project is so important too.
Well, that was certainly a situation that was thanks to you. You educated me and allowed me to educate him, and it all worked out very well.
It was so happy. Thank you.
So, Melina, thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today, and thank you for taking the time to view this video. You can follow Melina on LinkedIn and through the Cherry Tree Group website. Links will be included in the description below. We have more great speakers and content coming, so please like and subscribe below and keep an eye on this channel. Also, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. Thank you for viewing.
Thank you.